Hi guys, my name is Brittany and thank you for joining me on my channel. I'm creating this channel to discuss topics on spirituality, emotional well-being, energy work, and healthy lifestyle. So if you have interest in these topics, please subscribe to my channel for more to come. So this video is part 2 to my first video sharing about the unfolding of a spiritual awakening and how that has progressed over the last several years. In that previous video, I shared some about my personal and professional background and a spiritual awakening that occurred in 2015. A quick rundown from my first introduction is I've worked in human services for 13 years and as a psychotherapist specializing in trauma for 8.5 years. It has been such a privilege in getting to work with others, and through that, a wealth of information has been expanded on to help us do our shadow work, cultivate self-healing, self-love, self-knowledge, and creating healthy relationships, to name a few. These are all areas that will be discussed in greater detail in future videos to come. My hopes of sharing this is that others may find it helpful to support their healing journey as well. I will note too that I no longer work in clinical social work because I wanted to focus on exploring this holistic path of healing. So all of this information discussed in these videos is not clinical advice and is experiential. It's not to replace or substitute healthcare services, and it's always recommended you establish care with a licensed healthcare provider to address health-related needs. If you haven't already watched part 1, I will link that video below to check that out, and for now we will go ahead and get started. So in this video, I wanted to provide first a brief definition of Kundalini, which is a Sanskrit term for the divine feminine energy that is housed within the root chakra. This energy lies dormant until it seemingly awakens on its own or after intentional efforts using different practices that can range from tantric practices, yoga, spiritual energy transfer, meditation, or breath work, to name a few. Once this Kundalini energy awakens and it releases from being housed within the root chakra, it begins its natural path to ascend up the spine through the energy centers, also known as the chakras. If there are barriers along its path, the energy will work within those areas of the body and consciousness to heal and clear this energy highway so it can move up the path as it seeks to reach the crown chakra. The life force energy is often depicted as a coiled serpent energy laying at the base of the spine. When it is awakened, it's illustrated as a serpent releasing from this position and ascending upwards towards the crown chakra. It's depicted as a snake due to the beliefs of the serpent representing renewal, transformation, and regeneration. This powerful life force energy helps heal physical distortions within the body and mental and emotional imbalances that also disrupt the chakra system's natural state of balance and harmony. It also unlocks a range of energetic and spiritual potentials within one's consciousness as it moves upwards, and once it meets its destination within the crown chakra located at the top of the head, it can then lead to spiritual liberation and significant transformation within consciousness that leads us closer to the path of God realization. There are also advances in skills, abilities, self-healing, self-knowledge, and meeting one's highest potential in energetic terms by helping the nervous system adapt to this increasing light and energy to operate within its field or within the body. This increased energy and light within one's field of consciousness advances one's mind, body, and spirit. The energy, once adapted to and balanced within one's field, can then be directed to the outer world and offering catalysts to others for healing and self-knowledge, creating new advancements in healing, teaching, technology, science, and spiritual discovery and abilities. This leads to the evolution of consciousness and ultimately leading the creator back into its center or pure unmanifested divine consciousness state. Often deep healing work is needed around this emergence of spiritual energy to aid in removing blockages for the proper flow of energy and to support the nervous system and adapting to the significant influx of energy. If one awakens this and the mind, body, and spirit complex was not prepared, it can lead to this powerful energy burning out the nerves and cause serious negative physical, emotional, and mental symptoms. It's like overcharging an electric outlet with too much energy than it can tolerate, so the breaker trips and burns out. This can lead to Kundalini syndrome and be a traumatic experience that can have characteristics of spiritual mania or psychosis, along with a wide range of other difficult symptoms. I did not do anything to cultivate this Kundalini experience other than learning of it and having the intention to meet the highest potential and the desire to awaken to the truth. So a quick overview of what was discussed in the previous video on spiritual awakening was in 2014, there was a lot of personal changes being made, which I feel was a subconscious drive to purify and balance as much as possible in preparation for the dark night of the soul that was leading to a spiritual awakening that occurred in 2015. In 2016, the spiritual awakening continued to unfold, and greater healing work was being guided from within to do. I was continuing to heal from PTSD, early childhood trauma, learning about codependency and healthy boundaries, and working on strengthening confidence and self-esteem. After the awakening, I also had very strong desires to learn as much as I could about the psyche, teachings on the spirit world, reconnecting with cultural practices and beliefs, as well as energy work. It felt like healing was of the most importance, and I wanted to learn and heal as much as I could. So moving now to 2017, I started to have a lot of health problems begin to manifest that I had to seek medical treatment for, but I also worked with an integrative holistic medical provider who was willing to help me explore supplements and herbal options. After about a year and a half of medical intervention and functional medicine, I was able to have my health restored. So during the first 3 years of this awakening experience, there was a lot of intense fatigue to work through. And this was the last health concern that was to heal, and thankfully this resolved after a couple of years of enduring that. I don't know the exact cause for why there was such low energy at that time, but I have read and heard from several others that they've also experienced a lot of fatigue as well as health-related issues starting to arise during that time in the early awakening and healing periods. So this physical healing period that was being navigated felt like my body's way of manifesting healing blocks and old emotional wounds, and it was getting my attention in ways I couldn't overlook. It definitely felt like another purifying and balancing process. I plan to make a video in the future about resources to explore metaphysical characteristics related to emotional, mental, and physical health related issues that may offer some guidance on where to learn more about these type of connections. So now we're in the fall of 2017, and during this time, I began seeing snakes on a frequent basis over the next couple of weeks. I'm from the Midwest and I grew up in a small rural area, and I've still never crossed as many snakes as I did during this period. I used to be deathly afraid of snakes, but after working through healing so much around fear during the previous 2 years, I oddly was curious about this happening, and I felt no negative reaction to them. When I say I was seeing snakes, I am talking like 20 to 30 snakes over a few week period, which is wild. I started asking others if they were noticing this too, and no one else was having this experience. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like there was something significant to it. This is the mark of when I began recognizing synchronicities occurring, which I didn't have the language or full awareness of yet. I started to notice that I would be thinking of something or wanting to learn about it, and I would receive emails of blogs or posts about the topic. Someone would give me a book about it. I would be thinking about someone and I would get a text or a call from them, or I would be moving through an emotion and I would hear an affirming song. And it was just like the answers or whatever I was experiencing in that moment were quick to come into form soon after, which was a pretty cool experience. And over time, the synchronicities have definitely just become a normal part of daily experience. So piggybacking on the emergence of synchronicities starting to occur, I was subscribed to Lisa Rankin's website, and soon after I received the email about her blog on spiritual and Kundalini emergency. This is such a great article with many resources available to learn more about this or to seek professional guidance needed, so I would encourage anyone who is interested to read this article, and I will have that linked below in the description box. So going back to her article, this was the first time I had ever heard of the term Kundalini, and from that moment my path and interest turned from learning about the human experience through psychology to opening my eyes to the world of spiritual teachings and understandings of this life experience. What caught my attention in her post right away was the picture of what looked like an ancient art illustration of Kundalini, which was the imagery of a snake ascending. After reading the article, it was like my mind was blown open and my soul became relentless in seeking this information to understand more about this. I found Betsy Rabior's book, Our Light Body, and I couldn't put it down. It was like a part of me wanted to absorb as much as I could about the spiritual phenomena, and she wrote in such great detail about her spiritual awakening and Kundalini awakening experiences. Her work and description of her spiritual awakening felt so validating because this was the first time I had sought out and read about another person's awakening experience, aside from Lisa Rankin's blog that turned me in this direction. Once I realized this was a universal experience others were having too, it got me really excited. I didn't have anyone in my life that had shared experiences of a spiritual awakening to talk about this with, and didn't know that there were others sharing out there on this. So I sounded a bit strange, I'm sure, to others at times, but my mentor studied Buddhist philosophy in undergrad, so he could understand what I was saying, but couldn't fully relate to having an experience like that yet. During the first couple of years after the awakening, there were times that it felt like an isolating and lonely journey, not having others to talk about it with. And I realized it wasn't as common of an experience, and I stopped sharing much about the spiritual awakening with others. So like I mentioned before, I was primarily focused on psychology studies and neuroscience, which wasn't offering a discussion around spirituality or Kundalini awakening. Topics on spirituality were not discussed in the clinical research I was looking at, in the therapy modalities we were taught, or in school or my continuing education training, which I think is unfortunate that these areas are not included in psychology, mental health, and clinical work. I think we are missing a big piece there, but I do feel like the field is expanding more in this direction, and there will be more literature that is accepted within these fields of study to include the spiritual side of things eventually. So back to the book Our Light Body by Betsy Rabior. I felt so excited about this new discovery, but didn't feel like I could relate to the experience she was having associated with Kundalini. But nonetheless, I was excited to expand my understanding on this topic. This was something my intention and will beelined for, and I had a strong desire to cultivate this level of awakening, but I wasn't doing any practices to facilitate this process. So now we fast forward a couple of months into late December and early January of 2018. I know I discuss a lot of time frames in these two videos, but since the awakening, I've kept written record of these occurrences and of my dreams to reflect back on. I've also noticed how a lot of major realizations or deeper awakening moments occur in the fall and the springtime. I have read this could be related to increased spiritual and streaming energy associated with the equinoxes that make it likely that we will experience increased spiritual awakening occurrences, whether this comes in the form of the darkening of the soul, major change, or some form of spiritual realization. So in December and January, I began having increased changes in perception and experiences. One of these things was as I began to have an even greater increased empathic ability and could feel blockages and others' emotions very quickly within my body. I would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat and so hot during the day. I was having hot flashes and I would feel intense energy rising from my legs upwards. I had changes in sleep and I was waking up between 3 to 5 o'clock in the morning every night for what felt like months. There were several light bulbs burning out at the office and at the home around me during a 2-week period. There were moments where it felt like a warm, thick liquid energy was coming from underneath the tongue. It was creating this sweet taste, and that still sporadically happens from time to time now. I also started to see fields of color and energy moving around others. There were these symbols too appearing over one of their shoulders, and I would try to draw these out to show some of the people to see if these symbols had any significance to them, but no one could relate to them. A few years later, when in yoga teacher training, we were shown Buddhist symbols and the Dharma wheel, which these images looked similar to of what I was seeing over people's shoulders. Another thing that started happening is I began noticing these large auric fields around trees. I would begin to see flashes of diamond-looking lights within my vision. Sometimes there would be orbs or shadows that would appear. There were a lot of little floaters in my eyes. And then there were times where my eyes would lock in on something and they would begin to zoom in closer to the focal point, like what would happen if you were zooming in with a camera. Then there were times where the eyes would focus in on an area and there would be seen this ticking sense within the eyes of this movement from right to left going back and forth with the same rhythm similar to that of a ticking hand on a clock. My eyes would also get locked into these focused positions where I would be intensely gazing at one point for a period of time. There were also increasing experiences of seeing this reality before me as pixelated, similar to static snow on a TV. Then there were a couple of times when I would be looking out and I would see like a ripple effect, similar to like the holographic screen of reality had a little ripple or malfunction in it, and the screen seemed like it was going to tear open or come apart. When this particular thing would happen, it was pretty trippy and it would actually startle me at times because I wasn't quite sure if this was health related or spiritually related, but thankfully I was led to learning about Kundalini emergence beforehand, so this offered grounding that this may be the next experience of awakening. So again, I think learning about the Kundalini was divine timing. The information was provided before this occurred to prepare me for this shift. Had I not had any understanding of this before, I think it would have been really concerning, and I could have been misdiagnosed and treated incorrectly had I shared the experiences with someone who had a limited understanding. So I reached out to Betsy Rabior, the author of Our Light Body, and she held space for me to describe these experiences and provided guidance, which I have a lot of gratitude to her for. She also suggested Eckhart Tolle's teachings and Dr. Hawkins' work to help with a greater understanding of the evolution of consciousness and spiritual awakenings. They are two of my favorite teachers, and I would highly recommend their work to others who have interest in spiritual evolution, the nature of emotion, thoughts, and the ego, and ways to help heal and gain greater self-knowledge. So after I dived deep into their work and I was taking in so many new spiritual teachings and new understandings, the desire for enlightenment sparked a fire within my heart, and it felt like there was nothing more important to seek than this salvation and to be of service to help others do the same. So moving into February and March of 2018, I began having more intense lucid dreams where I could recognize I was aware within those dreams and I can make choices. I was put into intensely fear-based situations where it felt like my life was being threatened, or being in situations with apex predators where it felt like I had to take correct action in order to survive. I was beginning to see snakes appearing often in these dreams as well, and all of the emotions in the dreams was just as real as anything else. But one of the themes that would occur each time in these dreams is there would be an inner guidance that would come over me, offering instruction, reminding me to breathe, practice surrender, and to ask my higher power for help during those intense parts of the dreams. I would follow this instruction and let go, and the dream would turn in my favor. My body would unlock from all the tension, and I would be removed from the life-threatening situation. Looking back on it now, it felt as if I was in a form of training and practice, and this was creating an attunement with my higher self and my spirit guides that were guiding me through intuition. Another physical experience occurring around this time was each night there would be a vibrating throughout the body, and at first I wasn't aware this was coming from me. I legit thought my husband was shaking the bed and had like restless leg syndrome or something, so the poor guy, I was nagging at him to figure out what he had going on. One night, after I drifted into a light sleep, I was awakened by the bed vibrating, so I was asking him to reposition because he was shaking the bed. But then I heard him responding from the living room, and that is when I woke up and realized it was my body that was vibrating, and I could now begin to observe this energy occurring, and this lasted for several weeks where I would just be aware of this vibration, or I could watch the energy moving or pulsing in different parts of the body. Then one night in March, I woke up from a light sleep and I was in paralysis. I could only move my eyes and my body was stuck still. I felt a scary feeling that something was in our room present with us, and I could see a dark shadow moving and changing form, and then I felt this presence right over my shoulder. It felt like the devil, and it was communicating to me through my mind. It was telling me that all of the pain, fear, and confusion will go away, but I have to choose to live in ignorance again. Panic and fear was setting in, and I couldn't move to get closer to my husband or alert him to help me. Then a soft inner knowing spoke within my mind, telling me to surrender and to ask God for help. And in that moment, I realized I had free will and I could pray to God. So I began asking God to help me be free of this presence of this negative energy and to take away the temptation of ignorance. Then suddenly I felt the surge of energy move up through my body, and it was like this energy was spouting out of my brain or head like a water spout, and the energy resonated throughout my whole body, and my body was unlocked from the paralysis, and I was able to move again, and I got closer to my husband and turned my attention inward. There was also an explosion of light within my mind, so I just stayed with observing this light show that was happening. I also felt what was like cool chunks of water spouting out from my brain down into my body, and it was helping my body cool down. It also offered a relaxing and comforting feeling, and I was just watching this internal experience and the buzzing and the vibration along with energy circuiting throughout the body. Eventually I drifted off to sleep. Then when I woke up in the morning, there was all of this really intense, stimulated and aroused energy felt within the root chakra, which I later read was a common occurrence of the root chakra being stimulated by the powerful Kundalini energy. After all of this, life went on as normal, but for several months after, the characteristics of this continued for a while, but eventually it mellowed out and some of the characteristics stopped, while other senses and perception increased with greater access to intuition and other qualities of ability to channel, increased empathic abilities to perceive blockages in my body as well as others' bodies, receiving mental impressions and visions, as well as having precognitions within dreams. Also, another sense that started happening was the ability to perceive when a negative entity was present and being able to do the release work around that was needed, or being able to also sense if there was a positive entity that was present in the space. There was also something interesting that occurred a couple of years ago where I could auditorily hear the voice of the higher self, and it was giving me a direct message telling me to remember Ramabo, and that it was a glorified day, and I know you know what I'm talking about. Remember Ramabo. And I still don't fully understand what that is, and I continue to contemplate this and meditate on it. So if anyone has any insight into this word or something you can recall from a past life or another culture that this may have something to do with, please do share that, because I am all ears and I'm still trying to discern what that message meant. So after the Kundalini experience, there was still a strong desire to continue meditating, journaling, doing self-examination, reading spiritual work, doing research and learning about the chakras and the energy system. I also wanted to learn and practice energy work a lot more during this time, and I was interested in attending meditation and healing retreats, continuing the work around forgiveness, healing pride and desire, and working on releasing the victim mentality while not blaming the outside world for my own mistakes or the acts that I made out of ignorance and karma. And this helped me move into more of a state of empowerment and cultivate acceptance. As time went on, synchronicities started to get stronger, and I was experiencing increased run-ins with animals and insects, from groundhogs to eagles to hawks and butterflies, and it was happening at such a frequent rate and in close proximity to one another. So doubt or chalking it up as pure coincidence wasn't enough to explain how often it was happening, and I could just feel intuitively that there was something trying to communicate or get my attention there with that. At one of the trainings that I attended, I told someone about how strange this was, that I was having all these run-ins with these different animals, and she shared about spirit animals and how I can learn more about this online. When I got home, I looked this up, and I started to learn the meanings and qualities that these animals carried with them, and for the time of what I was going through my life, it was just spot on for some type of a message that I was meant to receive, or a sense of encouragement or reinforcement. Then I started noticing repeating number sequences, but had no reference for this yet either. It was happening so often, and again I couldn't brush it off as insignificant. So at a different healing retreat, I was telling my roommate about it, and she told me about angel numbers, and she shared Joanne's Sacred Scribes website, and after looking them up, it felt like it was in alignment again with what was happening and what it symbolized. A couple of months after the intense energetic experience occurred, the next part of the awakening was getting ready to begin, and this felt like a heavier rite of passage that was getting ready to unfold. I just remember feeling like, oh my gosh, how many dark nights of the soul are there? It wasn't something I actually had contemplated, and I was hoping there was just one, but I later learned that that is not the case, and that there can be several of those points that we experience in our life and on this path of awakening. The next part of the realization began to occur, and this one did not bring the same level of peace and comfort that the other awakening moments did. This one felt more like a shock to my psyche. I hit a point too after this of spiritual depression that I really had to work through, and the next realization I had was there is no Brittany. It's all an illusion, and the small notion of self does not actually exist beyond the relative truth. This was not easy to become aware of. It felt frightening, and apathy, nihilism, depression, and confusion kicked in big time behind this. This realization, for whatever reason, felt like a rude awakening to the ego. Early on during the awakening, getting to realize that the outer world, our thoughts, our emotions, and social constructs of how we know ourselves through was all an illusion felt really exciting, hopeful, and freeing to know that what causes suffering does not actually exist on a level of absolute truth and permanency. But never had the thought occurred that if that was all an illusion, then too was the character of the personality the mind was fully identified with. The answer to the questions I had been asking and meditating on for the last couple of years of who am I and what is God finally showed up, and it created a fragmentation and a sense of despair to the mind. This realization brought no peace, only feelings of confusion and being lost. It felt like the ego was ticked off that its identity and story wasn't real, and the notion that this was the creator experiencing itself through this manifestation of a temporary and pretend character offered no closest to divinity or comfort in this at all. There was a lot of overthinking about this new awareness and the mind feeling totally identified again with thought and emotion, and it made it all a very confusing time. The egoic self, we will call it, also got sick of anything spiritual and healing related during this period of time that expanded over several months. It felt frustrating that this experience didn't relieve me from the suffering like the previous realizations had, and that ego felt disillusioned with this whole process, thinking it was pointless and it was just a rinse and repeat cycle from suffering and imprisonment within the mind and from the emotions. I see now that the ego had strong expectations of wanting to be important or special, as well as being saved from the suffering by having these awakening experiences, but little did it know that none of the spiritual revelations would be for the ego's self-enhancing attainment, and it would actually lead to its demise in a sense of no longer being believed in or understanding the self through this limited perspective. So during these several months, there were oscillating periods of acceptance, although the intellect still couldn't fully make sense of this notion that there was no personal self or no individual Brittany outside of the Creator. And then the opposite occur, where there would be intense moments of resistance and suffering around the spiritual path. Another part of this unfolding process began in the late summer and fall of 2018. There were moments beginning to occur where awareness had become aware that it was aware. It's hard to articulate this, and I can't fully explain this experience other than awareness becoming aware of itself as the ego was becoming aware of its temporary self. It was like two parts within the self were awakening to its own self. Illusion and truth were getting to meet for the first time. Another way I might be able to describe this was it felt like to have awareness is still identifying with the form concept of the personal self. But to be awareness was to observe what form awareness was identifying with within the mind. This realization felt like a beautiful new understanding, and more acceptance was made for the personal self's lack of true reality. So after that last shift, life carried on as normal, but there was much more peace and acceptance and grace being experienced on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there were still your daily ups and downs, but for the most part, there were longer periods of peace being experienced with optimal health and a general sense of feeling balanced. My mind was really hopeful at this time because it felt like maybe this is the peace the enlightened avatars speak of, and I was praying it was here to stay. I see now that every moment and every day that occurs where there's not depression, confusion, doubt, and anxiety just feels like the greatest form of wealth, and those days are certainly no longer ever taken for granted. It feels like when we have a balanced sense of our psyche and our body is feeling well without pain, this is the greatest form of wealth that we could ask for in a day-to-day experience. So this next part of the unfolding process has to do with my professional experiences that were leading into transitioning from working in community mental health for several years to working in private practice. And my private practice was beginning to draw in a lot of spiritually based clients. It was a really cool transition to see, and it felt in alignment with the direction life was heading. I began learning so much from clients and about their spiritual journeys, and I couldn't be more appreciative for this and how much my eyes were opened by them teaching me even more about this path. A couple of clients shared information on the books The Raw Contact, Teaching the Law of One. There was divine timing in this for sure, because I don't think I could have accepted the Law of One teachings early on in the awakening process because of how scientifically and intellectually oriented my mind was. But it came into my life at just the right time where my consciousness wanted to evolve and expand in that new direction. And these Law of One teachings have opened new doors of consideration, realizations, and understandings that have been profoundly impactful and life-changing. And it has been such a significant guide and in a form a training manual. And I do plan on sharing more of this to come in future videos around these teachings. So let's move to the spring of 2020, when our family was preparing for the departure of a loved one to transition to the spirit world. And during this time, the realization arose that if there is no Brittany, then what animates this experience is God. Therefore, all experience, action, thought, and all feeling is God. This has been the most profound shift within awareness so far. It felt like a moment of being enmeshed with enlightenment. Before, there was only intellectual understanding that all is the one infinite creator, but now this truth could be felt. Shame and guilt seemed laughable because whatever has occurred to make one feel this way or feel outside of the good grace of God was never actually an individual personal self. It was, and it has always been, the Creator experiencing and expressing itself under veils of ignorance and forgetting. but nonetheless, it was the creator behind this inertia and action. And if the creator is nothing other than love, innocence, acceptance, immeasurable power, and worth, then that means all, including the small self, is of the same exact essence. So this recognition remained over the next couple of weeks, bringing with it a field of peace and rest within what felt like God's true nature. But slowly, normal human perception arose again, but there remained this holiness of this truth within the psyche and the remembering of how good the state of all being felt. Our loved one passed away soon after that, and grief still arose, although there was no resistance or attachment to it, and there was a peace and acceptance to allow the energy to arise, express, and pass as we moved through that loss. The interesting thing to note about all of these beautiful piercings of the veil to get a glimpse of the truth were also forms of preparation to prepare for the next stages of experience that oftentimes carried a heavy healing period or another dark night of the soul. So 2021 was coming in hot, and my world was getting ready to get turned upside down again for another pass of what felt like a year and a half of a dark night of the soul. I think having this grace of this awareness of our true God nature helped the psyche prepare to endure the next major upheaval and the changes that were needing to be worked through. So over that next year and a half, there were several significant challenges, changes, and losses happening in all parts of life. There were challenges of having to endure even deeper graveyards of shame, guilt, fear, doubt, and low self-esteem arising. It was a shock and surprising because of how much progress I thought was made and how much healing work that has been done for the last 8 years. I recognized through all of this that there were still deep wells of this old, stagnant, dormant energy. There was definitely more lessons of having to learn to love, accept, forgive, and know the self on an even deeper level than what was known before. It was a long, dark period again where perceiving through the ego was the primary experience, although the spiritual truths remained in the background and offered anchors to endure this new soul season of mind maturing and soul level learning. It's interesting how consciousness seems to be overtaken within these lower states of consciousness, such as guilt, shame, anger, and apathy, for periods of time, even after having profound realizations of the truth. It's like we get a taste for what is to come, but before we can claim residency in the higher states of consciousness, which is love, peace, and joy, everything that prevents us from living in that state permanently has to arise for some major healing of this life and past life karma, as well as spiritual learning and growth, which occurs only through experience. These initiation periods are tough as shit, so I just send love and compassion to all who are enduring this process of evolution. The chaos and the fire of these catalysts, I can only assume based on what I have seen occur time again in the past, are only forging new paths and experiences for the Creator to learn, know, and experience itself. And although the moments of darkness occur, this dance of life is bringing in even deeper levels of love, acceptance, and forgiveness for others and ourselves, along with creating deep roots in trust, faith, and wisdom, which only can be cultivated over time. One thing about this longing and the desire for the states of peace, joy, and love is it creates a fuel for our wills and our attentions to be focused on the truth and the Creator. This really helps us progress through this path and not get stopped by what we might perceive as roadblocks. And it's also important to just know that these high states have to be cultivated, and we have to learn to let go of expectations that they are just given to us without having to work to attain and remain within them. So the healing and transcending work continues, and thankfully that heavy period of time is lifting, and there's so much more love, faith, and gratitude returning. So with all of that said, we awaken in stages, and we're going to oscillate between all stages of consciousness. And when I'm referring to stages of consciousness is Dr. Hawkins' levels of consciousness map. And even if we have a higher level of consciousness, we will still experience the lower ones. But over time, as we heal and we learn more, we spend less and less time in those lower states, and we gain great insight, experience, and self-knowledge. The Creator learns of itself through experience, and all learning is on a spectrum. So after the spiritual awakening, life continues to unfold with new challenges, joys, and losses, which give us the opportunity to continue evolving and releasing what the mind has attached to and understanding itself and what gives life meaning. We must use our will, intent, and desire to continue pursuing and cultivating this path so we can reach our highest potential of enlightenment and rest in the truth and seeking meaning through the essence of who we are, which is love, rather than seeking this in the material world. So just when we think there is no more to learn or heal, the universe gives us a surprise and shows us even deeper and bigger ways we can love even harder and more, and how we can forgive and accept even greater than the times before. It's also normal to have to grieve for a while that healing is not linear, and that this is a lifelong process of growth, balancing, and development. Life as we know it in modern day society is consciousness seeking to enlighten itself and wake up from the dream it lulled itself into through wanting to experience itself as matter, so there could be a sense of evolution through the experience of separation and free will given to the self, along with duality to expand the one infinite creator's knowledge of itself. One of the greatest takeaways of this path in learning there is no personal self is to have fun. Laugh as much as you can, dance like you're going to shake this earth with your passion, and work on being kind to others, because how you treat them is actually how you're treating yourself, because there is no separation. All is God experiencing itself through this manifested reality. So with that, love hard, forgive quickly, get excited and curious about learning and studying yourself, and recognize you are the cosmos experiencing life as an individual self of Brittany, Jimmy, Joe, Sally, and so on. It's so important to recognize that God wants its experience of being you. The Creator isn't looking for us to mimic others' lives and paths, so find your spiritual path by being authentic to those inner callings, passions, drives, motivations, and the interests that you have coming from within. I think it's also important on this path to work on freeing yourself from the dogma and the doctrine of what another person's spiritual path looks like, or what you think it should look like. Create your own spiritual path by doing the things you enjoy and surrounding yourself with what you enjoy. And have fun on releasing old identities and creating new ones, with the ultimate understanding that behind the created expression of the self is God, who is having a really good time at creating and expressing life through you. It's fun for us to create and express and manifest, as we are microcosms of the whole, so therefore that is what the Creator sees as a good time too. So let your authenticity just run wild and free. That is what will make the universe smile and create fulfillment for authentic expression and experience as we seek to evolve and serve the highest good for all. Every perspective the Creator gets to experience itself brings joy and potential, and that is proven through all of the diversity that we see in our world and also throughout the universe. So know that the divine is having fun through exploring infinite versions of itself that potentiated with many factors involved over long periods of time. One of the most important things is to remember that something within you felt like such a badass and knew you could endure the challenges of the evolution of consciousness. So yay you for being a spiritual baller, and I hope you can celebrate the uniqueness of you and how you are a living form of divine manifestation. We can reflect back on this truth to help lighten the energy around us when life feels really heavy, or we are struggling with feeling separate from the whole, low self-esteem, or doubt, and be reminded that out of all of the forms of divine creative expression, God wanted to experience what it was like being you, and that is something to smile about, because you are awesome and beautiful in ways you may have yet to realize, but it's only a matter of time before you get to awaken to your own beauty and the beauty of life. So with that, we'll go ahead now and wrap up this video, and I would love to hear from you in the comments if you've experienced a spiritual awakening and the biggest areas of transformation it has created in your life. I want to thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me, and if this is the content that floats your boat, please like and subscribe and join me again in videos to follow.